Hello and thanks for joining us. Today, France is mourning the loss of one of the great icons of French film. Thousands of people have gathered at the National Memorial site in Paris as the country pays tribute to the actor Jean-Paul Belmondo, who died on Monday, aged 88. James Creedon is there for us. Our film critic Lisa Nesselson is also on the line, and joining me in the studio is film journalist Madison Mainwaring. Now, James, starting with you, it's an extremely rare honour for an actor to have a national tribute like this, led by the president.
It certainly is, Eve, and Emmanuel Macron said himself in his first public declaration about all of this that he's a national treasure. He wrote that on Twitter, and certainly you can see that truth in the eyes and in the expressions of the hundreds of people who are gathered here, thousands in fact, on the Esplanade des Invalides. There have been tears just in the past few moments in the eyes of many as his coffin is now being brought out of the courtyard at the centre of Les Invalides after a very heartfelt and moving speech by Emmanuel Macron. The music that is being played is Chi Mai from the film Le Professionnel. It's a very, very well-known air by Ennio Morricone, and I think that's triggering a lot of emotions for many people. That's one of his best-known films, Le Professionnel, but of course his oeuvre goes back much, much further to the 1960s and before, and he burst to fame with a bout de souffle in 1960 opposite Jean Seberg. But of course, Lisa and others will be able to tell you much more about that. But a very, very rare occasion for sure. Charles Aznavour, one of the figures of La Chanson Française, got the same honour in 2018. Johnny Hallyday had a slightly toned down version of the same, not quite a national homage like this, but a popular homage as it was known, somewhat less protocol around it at La Madeleine Church. But this is, short of having your body interred in the Pantheon, this is the greatest honour that the French state can bestow on you.
Okay, thank you very much, James. We'll come back to you in just a moment. But now let's remind our viewers at home about the life of a legend.
Affectionately nicknamed Bébel in France, he was one of the nation's biggest movie stars.
Jean-Paul Belmondo.
In the 1970s and 80s, putting Jean-Paul Belmondo's name to a picture guaranteed box office success. Son of renowned French sculptor Paul Belmondo and painter Madeleine Richard, as a young boy he was more interested in sport than school. Despite a brief stint as a boxer, Belmondo soon found his place as an actor. His first big role came in Breathless, opening the door for him to shine a few years later in another Jean-Luc Godard picture, Pierrot le Fou. He soon became well known as one of the faces of the new wave, acting as a bridge between independent and popular films.
Vous plaisez aux femmes?
Je ne sais pas.
Menteur.
In 2001, he suffered a stroke, but that didn't cost him his trademark smile. And 8 years later, he returned to the big screen with Jean Dujardin in A Man and His Dog. Finally, after boycotting the César Awards for his entire career, Belmondo accepted a tribute from the Academy in 2017 with 2 minutes of thunderous applause for the well-loved cinema great.
A memorial ceremony is underway for Jean-Paul Belmondo in the centre of Paris. I'm joined here in the studio by the film journalist Madison Mainwaring. Hello there. Thank you for joining us. Now, take us back to the start of his career, because he was actually told he would never make it as an actor.
He would never make it. He was told that he was too ugly to ever seduce a woman in front of an audience credibly. And he had broken his nose, and that remained a kind of scar for the rest of his life. With various institutions, school, conservatory, everyone, no one liked him. And I think that we see this in his earlier roles. He's really fighting against a system and is very credible in those roles for that reason. He had a love for sports, athletics. So he was a cyclist. He played soccer, was told that maybe he had a chance as a soccer athlete, and then boxed. He was spotted on the street by Jean-Luc Godard one fine morning in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. He was very interested in his physical quality and later remembered that Godard really gave him permission to be himself on screen. And it was that magical chemistry that made Belmondo as we know him.
It certainly did. All his career spanned half a century. Jean-Paul Belmondo blazed a trail through movie history. More than 6.5 million people in France watched special TV screenings of his films after his death was announced on Monday. Schedules were cleared for an actor whose swaggering smile and one-liners are inscribed in the national consciousness. Let's look back now at some of those key roles.
Notre prochaine escale sera Rio de Janeiro.
Rio?
Rio?
Rio de Janeiro!
C'était un film d'aventure.
Ah, quelle terrible 5 heures du soir.
C'était un roman d'amour.
Pouvez-vous faire monter mes bagages?
Herald Tribune!
Patricia.
Je voudrais construire Romeo et Juliette.
Oh là là.
Well, let's cross back now to the Invalides in the centre of Paris, where France 24's James Creedon is outside the memorial ceremony that's taking place for Jean-Paul Belmondo. Now, James, it is coming to an end now. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it was a very somber ceremony in the beginning, I think, very dignified. There was a lot of protocol, in particular because it was a military ceremony at one point. The president's speech, I think, was very much appreciated. This is, I think, Emmanuel Macron at his best in many ways in his role as president for a cultural event such as this. Remember, Emmanuel Macron himself did a lot of theatre as a teenager. His wife, Brigitte Macron, was a theatre teacher. I think he has a genuine appreciation for the arts, for cinema, and for what Belmondo did. So the speech went down very, very well. His grandchildren were also featured centrally in this ceremony. They came in just ahead of the coffin being brought into the courtyard, and his grandson Victor described his solar presence, and he said that when the sun sets, it never in fact fades, and it will rise elsewhere. Emmanuel Macron also spoke of how he had passed on that flame of his I suppose great talent for acting to actors such as Jean Dujardin, so that legacy will go on.
And Madison, tell us, he had an extremely unusual path, like no one who came before him, really. He was this cool rebel of the new wave of French cinema, typified in Jean-Luc Godard's 1960 film classic Breathless. But he also did very commercial films, didn't he?
Absolutely. No, and I think in French cinema, which tends to be polarized between art house and commercial films, he miraculously managed to travel both paths. Some say that his career was defined by art house cinema, Jean-Luc Godard, in the first half of his career, and then more commercial work in his second. But he never turned his back on the public. He actually was given a César for Best Actor in 1989, and he turned it down, saying the public is always the one who decides.
He was certainly very fun, wasn't he? Well, Jean-Paul Belmondo was also known for doing all of his own stunts. France 24 has been speaking to the English actress Jacqueline Bisset, who starred opposite him in the film Le Magnifique in 1973, and the director Claude Lelouch, who directed him 4 times.
I think it's 49 years ago we did this film, Le Magnifique. He was very natural. I've said to various people, he was the most coordinated person I've ever worked with. He was so relaxed within himself. I mean, he was in Mexico, he was combing his hair, shooting a gun, jumping from rock to rock, saying dialogue, being super cool in the character, and also but extremely sure of himself. I knew he had a background in theatre, and I knew he had a serious background, but he liked to play the fool a lot.
Jean-Paul Jean-Paul was always so joyful, so I think he would want his passing to be a party. So we'll take part in it. Jean-Paul was our Charlie Chaplin, and look at Chaplin, he lives on. He's still with us. So Jean-Paul is now officially one of the immortals.
And someone else who had the pleasure of meeting Jean-Paul Belmondo is our film critic Lisa Nesselson, who we can speak to from the Deauville American Film Festival in Normandy. Lisa, what was he like?
Well, all I can say is that I had the pleasure of sharing a stage with him in early 2018 for an honorary award for his career. And, I didn't grow up with him, but of course I was aware of his phenomenal range of roles and his incredible talent. What I wasn't expecting was that a man who had suffered a stroke, who had a hard time standing up for long periods of time, who could barely speak, still radiated phenomenal charisma and kindness. He actually had a twinkle in his eye. I've never stood next to someone who really, really did radiate that sort of thing. And I'd have to say that the word that comes to mind for how people are responding to his death is affection. I've heard people say, oh, I couldn't stand Jerry Lewis, or I hate Tom Cruise. If you don't like Jean-Paul Belmondo, if you didn't like his films, you're going to have to leave the country for a while, because it's just universal pleasure in having experienced being the beneficiary of this man's talent. As was said earlier, he was phenomenally athletic. Jacqueline Bisset said he was sure of himself, and that comes through on screen. For example, I've been reading up on some of his stunt work, and it's just extraordinary that he didn't die a few times over. As of a few weeks ago, the speed limit for an automobile in the city of Paris is 30 kilometers an hour. There's a movie in which Jean-Paul Belmondo, with no safety precautions, ran over the top of a Paris metro train that was going 70 kilometers an hour. The great stunt director, Rémi Julien, I just read something about how he was thrilled to shoot with Belmondo in Athens, because for chase scenes, they didn't have any precautions or permits requirements. And so again, Belmondo was running over the tops of moving cars, trying to leap onto a bus, which he successfully did. Nowadays, we know that they use things that they can erase electronically. But in those days, it was real film running through a camera in real time, and Jean-Paul Belmondo's real body.
Madison, tell us, why was he so appealing to such a broad audience here and abroad?
Absolutely. No, I think in America, I found him as an American and fell in love with French culture in these New Wave films. And I think it is that rebel quality, the way that he set out to live his own life, and also, really invited everyone to dream with and through his characters. I think so many people from various backgrounds identified with him on screen, and he believed in the cinema as this very powerful instrument not to forget about one's everyday troubles, but to really imagine what could be.
Okay. And Lisa, just finally, if people at home were to watch one of his films, which one should they choose?
That's a tough question that I should have anticipated. Every time they're on television in France, millions of people tune in. It's a generational thing. I saw a 13-year-old boy interviewed who had enjoyed watching Belmondo's films from the 70s and 80s with his father on TV, and was absolutely stunned to find out he was 88 years old, because to him, to a 13-year-old boy, that action and adventure was right there. If you want to see his real acting chops, it's hard to beat Breathless. It really did bring the French New Wave into international flower. And if you want to see one of his serious roles, Alain-René Stavisky. He looks great in the clothes.
That brings us to the end of this special programme dedicated to the French film star Jean-Paul Belmondo, who died this week, aged 88. Thank you to James in Paris, Lisa in Deauville, and Madison, who's here with me in the studio. Thank you very much. Now we're going to leave you with the film he's probably best known for, Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless. Thank you for joining us. Remember, our website, we're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a, Michel?
Je suis un grand boxeur. Oui, je suis emmerdé. Connaissez-vous ce garçon?